The God Valley incident is finally happening as all these famous figures from all over the world have come to duke it out in the ultimate battle. But, as usual with so many folks around, there's a bunch of secrets and hidden details that end up getting lost. Such as Gonko's new title in Japanese, which proves how she serves as Emu's vessel, or Blackbeard's possible buccaneer lineage.
So,
let's break down all of them. On the cover, Yamato has finally completed the pilgrimage and so returns to the flower capital. Yamato is standing on top of a hill on the northeastern side of the flower capital, which, may I point out, literally was not present in previous depictions of the flower capital, even though we've seen perfect bird's eye views of it, but we can cut Oda some slack. In the back, we can see the Shogun's castle and Mount Fuji, as well as the Sakyo neighborhood marked by the big pagoda, which is where Danger used to live inside of as his own residence, as a Yakuza. On this hill is a shrine, dedicated to Odin as well as his Nakama, as it says where he and his comrades are, enshrined for their service to the country. You may vaguely recall this was actually mentioned during the end of Wano in chapter 1052, where Kinemon mentioned wanting to build a shrine to Odin on a hill with a view of the flower capital, where he and those who fought to the Fanawana would be enshrined, including former daimyo such as Yasui and presumably others like Shimatsuki Shimaru, Fugatsuya and Usuzuki Temperatu. Alongside them would also be enshrined Asher Doji and I, so that they can all rest witnessing the beauty of their capital forevermore, a sight that even Yasu commented upon during his execution. Back to God Valley, the members of the Davy clan are now being shown off on stage, which, as we mentioned previously, should be about 12, given how there's 13 S-rabbits and not counting Kuma the buccaneer. But I wonder if they threw Teach's mom into the lot with them as well, or if they know that she's not part of the clan but simply married into it. Though the numbers are hard to make out on stage, as only about 9 or so are visible. It's possible 3 more could be hidden behind the big guys. Speaking of which, we do here get to see Teach's mom quite briefly with spiked hair and sharp eyes. Though Teach clearly has inherited his dad's eyes, she tries to shield her kid, but unfortunately T is exposed to the horror of the celestial dragons, a trauma that seems will stick with him for a very long time to come. Among the other members of the Davy clan, however, we do see fairly large guys, and interestingly, one of them even seems to carry a hat that looks like a straw hat. But I have to wonder if this has some deeper meaning, or if Otis is just screwing with us. The odd thing, though, is the comment by one of the members in the audience who claims, which basically translates to, "You must be buccaneers too," right? The comment likely seems made in regard to the larger members of the clan with bulky builds that are reminiscent of buccaneers like Kuma.
So,
the celestial dragon is assuming some of the Davy clan members are buccaneers, but all we have to go off of is just their assumption.
So,
it's hard to say for sure if they are in fact buccaneers, or if this is just a random comment just speculating, but it would seem odd to include that if it wasn't the case. And it doesn't sound like the comment he would make without at least knowing some of that history. That said, this isn't necessarily a new idea, as for many years people have speculated whether Blackbeard does in fact possess buccaneer blood, and how that might relate to his body being different, something that Marco attributed as the reason for him possessing 2 Dao fruit abilities. And this could explain a bunch of things, as Vegapunk implied regarding Kuma that the special trait of the buccaneers appears to be something related to the concept of your will remaining even after death. Though he didn't fully elaborate, as he was cut off, mean that details are still vague. So I wonder if perhaps in some way Jabek was also a buccaneer, as Teacher's mother doesn't seem to quite have the height for it. And while Jabek is more slender, he's also quite a large man, and this could be why he ended up allowing his will to live on within Teach. This could explain how Jabak could have hypothetically lived on within Teach's body, as we've long since speculated, and how 2 souls existing in one body could allow one to eat 2 dull fruits, and perhaps also be why he doesn't sleep. Just in the same way that Kuma's will still remain within his body, even though we're technically dead. Ace claiming that Teach has lived twice as long as a normal person would, which Oda pointed as being a very important line, could also relate not just to the not sleeping part, but also the possibility of this being the second lifetime he is on. Still, we'll have to see. Also, I don't want to really bother Oda too much with inconsistencies, but the size of the stage here is in a whole other dimension than it was seen as in chapter 1095, or whether it was just a small person-sized stage. Well, here, it's a whole arena. But primarily, it's interesting because it makes the 9 treasure chests, unlike 6 originally, look particularly gigantic when they are not intended to be from what we see later, as they're supposed to just house Druce, as Saturn and Garling observe. The latter says that the discovery of the Davy clan here was just a twist of fate, which is an interesting concept to talk about considering just last chapter, Jebek as well was talking of fate, and this being titled The Island of Fate. The dialogue between the two is also fitting as Garling would end up overtaking Saturn's position too. On the other hand, as we had assumed, indeed, the mother speaking to Dragon was Shanks, and Shamrock's mom. Though again, we do not see her face. She begs Dragon to take her children away from Garling, and so, left with this final wish, Dragon can't help but spring into action. Marines are supposed to have left the island, staying on the ships to ensure no one leaves by sea, but Dragon remained to follow his own convictions. At the same time, the genocide tournament begins, giving rabbits 1 hour to find a hiding place until they begin to be hunted. They are promised that if they can survive 3 weeks, they will be liberated. While such survival for so long already seems so unlikely, as we are told by Ivankov, any survivors after the 3-week period would be executed. Regardless, but they are given the lie that they might survive in order to keep them desperately running. The sheer horror of this game can't be put into words. In what might be one of the most difficult to read One Piece chapters in a long time, be families, elders, or even children, none are safe from this twisted game, all while the entire game is being broadcasted to the other celestial dragons and Marahua who are watching it all for their personal enjoyment. Several of the families battle for glory to become the one with the highest score, but among them, we have mentions of not just the Figureland, Manmeyer or Sheffer families, but also the Babetto family, which would be one of the yet unnamed families we were waiting to get the name of. The name Babto can be romanized in different ways, as either Babette, Babe, Babe, or Babth. So, it's hard to say which one Oda is intending. Beyond the exiled Nefeltari, the 19 founding families now include the Neonas, the Figurelands, the Jaras, the Marcuses, the Tubmans, the Ethan Barents, the Shepherds, the Manmeyers, the Doniotes, the Rimoshifas, and now the Bavads with another 8 still unnamed. Speaking of the Manmeyers, we do get to see Gonko, or her whole title as Saint Manmeyer Gonko is displayed here, probably for Oda to remind readers who were not aware that her name was Redkin, and corrected as Smanmeyer Gunko. The name Saint Gunko is officially romanized in Japanese, showing that Oda wants to go with saint for male or female like the official translation does. As I explained before, male celestial dragons carry the honorific C, which means saint or holy, whereas female celestial dragons carry the honorific Gu, which is a suffix used for members of the Japanese royal family, which fundamentally means lady or princess. I had proposed using saint and saintess to distinguish, which while not fully correct in English, better fits that idea. But I suppose Oda is going for the more correct standardized saint for both, even if that means this little nuance gets lost in translation. Far more interesting though is Gonko's title, as she appears to have a completely unique title given only to Heron. This is a complicated term, so let's break it down part by part. First of all, Kami means god, which in this context has been often used to refer to Emu. Consider the god ruling over this world. Shuin is a unique word Oda has made here by combining the kanji for servant and blade. No is the possessive particle attributing the Shuin to Kami, meaning that Kami no Shuin translates to God's servant blade. This term makes a lot of sense, as Gunko here is basically defined as being Emu's personal servant like his blade. In Japanese, to be someone's blade, and in English to an extent, or to be someone's knife, means that you are basically their servant, their guard to assist them in any situation. And so this title defines Gonko as Emma's very own personal servant blade. In retrospect, this explains quite a few things. It explains why we saw Gonko serving Emu in the flower room when Jabak invaded, kneeling to Emu while also wearing a veil quite similar to that of Emu. This also explains why Gonko has the Aronomi, also seen in this chapter, as that same power was the one that we saw kill the cobra in the empty throne room. While it's possible that Gunko was hiding secretly in that room to bite Emu's orders, it did seem like the arrow did come from Emu directly, that it would still make sense if Emu comfort Gunko a power that they possess directly, as so intrinsically tied are Emu and Gunko's lives, seemingly. So, This seems to further suggest that Gonko is the only one that Emu might be able to possess directly rather than all of the god knights or those with a mark in general, which makes sense as she is, after all, Emu's own servant blade. Nonetheless, this is still a fate she doesn't seem to be willing to follow, as glimpses into her past have suggested that she had some tragic event with her father at a time where she was wearing the same outfit as now. Interestingly enough, which we can now see also has a skirt and a cave to it, but at the same time also recalled spending some time with Brooke when she was younger.
So,
the implication is that she has been somehow brainwashed by Emu and made to serve her all this time as her own personal assistant, which would also explain why she and Commander Shamrock were sent to Albeth as some of the two most important of the God Knights. However, the fact she's doing this all against her will is all the more ironic because in Japanese, the warplay here is quite evident. Here, Oda has combined two words, servant and blade, to create this new term, servant blade. But usually in Japanese, the word shuin is associated with a much more common term, the word for prisoner, shuin. Indeed, Gunko is a prisoner of Emu, forced to be God's servant against her will. I have to wonder if Gunko at this point even is her actual name, as like we've mentioned before, it is mentioned by the kanji for military and child girl, fundamentally meaning child soldier. However, what's interesting about this title is that one of the celestial dragons focusing on bats refers to Gunko by saying, "Are you sure she's still Godblade retained by the God Knights?" The way this is worded seems to make it sound as if her position is one of under the God Knights, meaning that either this position as Emma's servant is one that is demeaned in such a way that it is not valued as highly as the God Knights, which is consistent with what we said that Goko is basically being treated like a prisoner of Emu, or alternatively that the position of Servant Blade is more like an apprenticeship to the God Knights where Go had not yet fully become a God Knight but was training to be one. This is interesting given how in her volume Redcon, Gunka's title of God Knight in Elbaf was actually removed, though it is still present a couple chapters prior during her first introduction. This also makes sense as she doesn't show up in the lineup by the end of the chapter, but it's hard to see for sure given her connection with Emo and the fact that she is the only one so far that possesses this completely unique title. At the same time, a young Summers is also being a disgusting, horrid monster using his powers which he already possessed at this time to torture a little kid. This makes me look forward all the more to him getting absolutely destroyed by Gaben as the two had met at some point in the past, and it's most likely that it was here where Gaben would leave Summers with a trauma he will definitely not be forgetting anytime soon. Sadly, the horrors continue and Dragon is forced to bear witness to them all, reshaping his view of the world and paving the way for a small spark of revolution to take flame. Part of that spark, however, is inspired by a young Ivankov, who holds on to hope to wish for liberation in a scene that we had seen in chapter 1096. What we didn't see is that Ivankov, Kuma, and the others were almost shot to death by a rifle, but Dragon defended them by shooting the celestial dragon with one of his tranquilizer rounds, allowing the group to survive. Of course, in the future, Ivankov would meet Dragon again, leading to the freedom fighters and later with Kuma, the founding of the Revolutionary Army. But as all hope seems to vanish, suddenly the rock spirits make landfall on the island. Japsi, Barl, Shiki, Kyo, John, Newgate, Stussy, Gloriosa, Strozen, Lin, and Kaido are all here among a couple others not seen here like Gilbaster. But as we are told, Uko did in fact sit this one out with a really poor excuse. As we see, their objectives are primarily to rescue Shaki, though they also have an interest in plundering the treasures found here, which include the devil fruits. Whitebeard actually seems to view Shaki as a friend and wants to rescue her as a result, even if he does still have a crush on her, while Big Mom and Kaido are going after the devil fruits. Interestingly, Barbell has now shaved his hair, which matches his appearance in chapter 1096, making that difference consistent. Also, while seen before, it's worth noting that Newgate had a unique Jolly Roger in the shape of a skull with his mustache on that ended up being different from his simple scene later when he formed his own pirate crew. You can also spot Shiki and Kyo in the back bickering with each other as we were told. After all that they were rivals. Captain John is also still hitting the same bottle as he was seen in not just chapter 1096, but also when he was a zombie in Thriller Park, as I suppose alcoholism sticks around for a while. I should quickly correct something, however, that I did mention last video, as John did seemingly survive God Valley because he allegedly died being murdered by his crew because he wouldn't tell them where he hid his legendary treasure, leaving its location an unknown mystery to this day which Buggy wishes to find. Though a hint to it should be in his band, which Olafie had picked up during Thriller Bark and later gave to Buggy in Impel Down. I do wonder, however, if said treasure could even be one of those treasures we see here in God Valley. In the ensuing chaos, Dragon takes advantage to take both of the twins Shanks and Shamrock, but ultimately we know that only one of them would end up in Roger's hands. I do have to wonder then how the two split up, as I assume maybe Dragon was the one who put them into different treasure chests. But maybe Garling kept one of the chests as it remained at God Valley while the other one ended up with the Roger Pirates. Speaking of the twins though, Their existence was actually foreshadowed in chapter 1096. At the start of the chapter, Garling said, "Watch me, children," which many misinterpreted as him taunting the other god knights. But the way it was worded in Japanese didn't sound like "watch me, brats" or anything condescending, but rather referring to actual children given the word used. And so it makes sense that he was referring to the twins, basically telling them, "Look how great your father is." Following the Rock's pirates, the Roger pirates, also the sun on the island, ready to take Shaki to the point that they end up trembling over Roger. Behind him, you can also spot Really and Go shooting glares at each other, showcasing very much their Zoro-Sanji-like dynamic. Further behind, we also have Patermu, Max Marks, Taro, Jackson Banner, who many said is reminiscent of Na and doesn't beat said allegations by doing the iconic pose here. Rangaram, Mugen, Mr. Mamora, Milpain, and Donino. In chapter 1096, we hear a faint cry of Roger saying, "Come here, rocks," and Jebek saying, "Out of the way, Roger?" Which makes more sense now, as perhaps Jabek didn't want to fight Roger right away due to wanting to focus on rescuing his family first and foremost. To stop them, the God Knights move into action, showing us quite a few more than before. The name itself is romanized by Oda as Knights of God, which is basically the same definition as the God's Knights, just written with an off instead. However, this does show that their name is in fact referring to them being the knights serving God. In this case, of course, God being once again Emu. The official translation unfortunately mistranslated their name as the Holy Knights, which I can kind of see what they were trying to do with the Holy Land. But Knights of God, or God Knights, if you just want to roll it off the tongue better, is the more correct translation here. Among them, we see, of course, Garling as well as Summers, the latter wielding his thorny sword. By his side, we also see the blue-haired woman from the Manmeyer family who spoke with Gonko last chapter and first appeared in 1096, which we now have a confirmation she's in fact a God Knight, too. Next to Garling is this woman with long hair that also first appeared in 1096, which while depicted as dark here, was shown to be blonde in the anime. We also see here her weapon for the first time being some kind of spear or sword with a very triangular edge. Opposite of her is the other knight we saw in chapter 1096 being a tall man wearing a cow skull similar to Road in a sense, though Road was wearing a Musa skull. As we had previously seen, he appears to be carrying a scythe, and these two had a brief voice line in the anime if you're curious about how they sound like, which indicates the skull guy is in fact a man. But beyond them, we get two brand new gun knights. For one, there's a very tall woman as clear by the breasts, who interestingly possesses small horns, jagged teeth, hair split into two colors, and particularly large hands, whilst also smoking what looks like a cigar. There's not that much more that we can infer from her, but the jagged teeth in that mouth are heavily reminiscent of Killing Gams, meaning she could be his mother or potentially just another member of the Remo Shifu family. And behind them is the thing which kind of looks like a yeti on one hand, but at the same time also appears to have bat-like wings with large horns, jagged teeth surrounded by a large beard. And again, the wings, though, I wonder how much of the beard is part of his powers as a creature or if it's just due to being some old bearded man. The wings are the most defining treetail here. So my best guess is that this is some kind of bat demon who is in his transformed state, much like Killing. Whether by fruit or demonic power, which could be any variety of mythical demonic bats like the Yamachi yokai, the Mayan Kamatots, or the Ilocano Batibat. The pirates keep advancing as we see Whitebeard and Shiki mowing down marines, with Shiki in particular staying afloat with his powers. However, suddenly a cannonball crashes onto the island like a meteor as Garb's fleet has arrived, as marred by the iconic dog head which he had used since all the way back then. Coming on it is, of course, Vice Admiral Garp, who throws cannonballs just like he did against Luffy. And by his side is his ever-loyal Bogard, who clearly is way older than he appears to be, given how he was here 38 years ago and already appears quite old enough. With this, all the legends are gathered on God Valley. The Rock Spiro, the Roger Pirates, the God Knights, and Garp and his Marines. We now know how history will play out. Roger and Garp will team up against the Rocks and take down the crew once and for all, while the island itself will disappear without a trace. But what else lied in this historical events? What was the real truth to this era-defining incident? Then,